Welcome to Back Talk, where we are bringing you parenting advice that works. I'm your host, Melissa Corkum. I am the parent coach and founder at thecorkboardonline.com. Today we're talking about all things mental health, and I have my guest, Anne, with me today. And thank you so much for coming and bringing your expertise to Back Talk.
Well, thank you for having me, Melissa.
So, I feel like mental health has always been a thing, but there's just a lot more awareness that we're starting to bring to the table in our culture around this, and it's starting earlier and earlier with our kids. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what you're seeing. What's the landscape look like in terms of mental health? What are some of the things that our kids are struggling with?
So we're starting to see kids who are, as young as it could be 3 or 4, definitely by 5, having some mental health issues. We see a lot of anxiety and depression, ADHD, some mood disorders, and these things are starting earlier and earlier.
So do you think it's that we have more awareness, that we're kind of like it's always been around, but now we're like paying attention to it and diagnosing it? Or do you think that there's factors that our kids are really, more anxious, more depressed than they were, maybe 50 years ago?
I think it's both those things. There is a lot of awareness around it. We're trying to get mental health to be not so stigmatized anymore. But I really think, kids today, they're dealing with a lot of things that we did not deal with. Way back when. There's a lot more screen time, there's a lot more video games, there's a lot more, on the phone, social media, and there is also a lot of, just maybe not having the family together as much. We have families that are not all living in the same house. And I don't even know if we have everybody sitting down to family dinner anymore.
Right, so even if we have a cohesive nuclear family unit and there hasn't been divorce or remarry, we're going in a bajillion different directions at once. And so we might not be settling around and checking in with each other in the same ways. I just heard a statistic recently that the first wave of kids who have been digital natives from the very, very beginning are now entering college. So these are so I remember a time when we didn't have phones in our pockets all the times. I still remember when we, dialed the phones with the rotary. But kids in college now literally have none of those recollections. Like, they've had digital music from the very beginning. They've had phones, screens, iPads, iPods, all of those things. And the statistics are showing that the anxiety of kids coming into colleges is astronomically higher than it has been in previous generations. So behaviorally, or kind of practically, mental health, what does that even look like? What does it look like if you have an anxious 3-year-old or an anxious 12-year-old or a depressed 3-year-old or a depressed 12-year-old? What are some things that parents might see kind of day to day?
So, we have a lot of kids nowadays who are showing symptoms really early, and what you might see at home is you might see some isolation, not wanting to be around the family, not wanting to go to school. We have a lot of kids who have school refusal because they're so anxious about going into school, whether it be for a social reason or an academic reason. We have kids that are having temper tantrums, sometimes always being on the screens, don't give the kids the good coping skills as to how, the kids are used to immediate gratification now, and they're not learning coping skills as to what happens when you can't get something immediately. So we're seeing some, some temper tantrums. We might see some problems in school, and not only academically, but behaviorally. So really, if you've got the teacher calling you or writing you and emailing you, telling you there's a problem, really wants you to listen to that teacher. As a parent, we need to listen to that teacher and not just assume the teacher has it out for my kid would never do something like that. I think a lot of times nowadays parents push their kids to be the best, to do the best, to have several activities that they're good at, which can really cause these kids to have anxiety anxiety. Some of these kids have a lot of pressure on them, and they're not really being taught, how do I cope with that pressure?
Yeah, we define success a lot of times as all the experiences that we're exposing our kids to. It's like the right thing to do to have them in music class and art class by the time they're 3 and 4, to make sure that they have enough sports and enough extracurriculars on their college, applications and their resumes, and we're pushing for activity. But I think we are starting to see some of that backlash, that's not all positive, and that maybe if we're not, I mean, mom guilt's a real thing, right? So sometimes when we have a lot of kids, and so we literally cannot do that with everyone.
Right.
And so sometimes I feel guilty that, like, my kid, we were just having this conversation with my daughter the other day. She's 14. She's never played a team sport, like even at the rec council. And my son, who has played team sports, was like, what's wrong with you? Have you never, do you not know about these things? Why have you never played on a team? Why have you never had a coach? And I was like on the sofa, like kind of watching this thing go down, and I was like, do we like mess her up for life? She's never played a team sport. And 50 years ago, that wasn't even a thing, right? Like, people weren't feeling guilty about that. So it's good to hear you say that, to kind of relieve some of that, like, it might be better if we're not doing all the things. We don't have to feel bad if we haven't exposed our kids to 100 million things. Right.
Why do we constantly have to go to sports and, scouts and music lessons and, tutoring? Why can't the family just go out and take a walk? Go to the park, go to the playground, just have a family game night, family board games. I worked at a partial hospital program for children for a long time, and I remember reading them a book and then all of a sudden asking them, how many of you are read to at night? Something I always did with my daughter, and very few raised their hands. They're not being read to anymore. Which is time that moms and dads can spend with their children, right?
Well, and there's a lot of good lessons and good stories,
sure.
right?
Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
So how do we know, because we're worry-warts sometimes as parents, right? So how do we know when it's typical? Because kids will throw a tantrum. Kids will struggle in school. Kids will refuse to go to school sometimes. Kids will, some are introverts and will want to be alone. Some are extroverts and will kind of always, be maybe a little disruptive or talk when they're not supposed to be. So how do we know when it's like kind of developmental, typical kid stuff, and then how do we know that we need to start thinking about extra resourcing around something?
That is a tough one because sometimes, we would have children who would come into the program and they'd say, oh, they have ADHD. And I'd say, well, they're 5. Some of this, they shouldn't be, they are going to get up and maybe get out of the circle at circle time. But you know your child best. And you also know, if you also know that each one of your children is different, like you said, someone could be an introvert, someone could be an extrovert. I think the teachers can help us with that too. As I said before, if a teacher's reaching out to you, listen to the teacher. Don't discredit and say that your child, oh, my child could never do that. Say, I really want to hear what this teacher has to say, because you may have, you have circle time with a 4-year-old in nursery school, and some of the kids sit and some of the kids walk up and down and they walk all around. But if it's a constant thing that child is up walking around, they're hyperverbal, they can't wait their turn, they can't let anyone else talk, then there might be something that you want to look into. But I really think that our schools can really work with parents and really let them know this is what we're seeing in your child. And also, if you do have your child join a team sport, your coach is a really good advocate to let you know whether or not your child is a team player or not. And oftentimes we have kids who are having temper tantrums, but if they're 8 years old and they're temper tantruming like a 2-year-old, something might be wrong. It might be time to reach out and see if there's an issue. Also, your pediatrician would be a wonderful resource. And I always recommend that you go to your pediatrician first. If the teacher's telling you things are going on and you're seeing some things in school, go to your pediatrician and talk to your pediatrician about that.
Yeah, those are good words. And I would say, like, how disruptive is it and how many places are you hearing it from, right? If you're hearing it from the baseball coach and the school and you're struggling with it at home versus like isolated incidences, take the big picture into consideration. And I always say, as your kid gets older, things generally should feel like they're getting a little bit better unless your kid's really struggling. And then the age gap starts to get bigger and the developmental gap bigger. And so as they get older, it feels like it's getting worse instead of better. So we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about, so now that we've established that there's some struggles and there could be some problems, what do we do to even prevent them? Or if we're struggling with mental health, how do we get our kids the help that they actually need?
Free-range poultry are cut fresh to order. Chefs create culinary-inspired prep foods made fresh every day, which pair nicely with our vast selection of fine wines and spirits. Choose from handmade pastas, artisan cheeses, organic produce, and grocery items, all from the finest purveyors. We're Stelly Market Fresh, from our family to yours.
RVN TV is a platform for people of any industry to share their story. Over 285,000 viewers are tuning in to RVN TV shows monthly. We guarantee a great experience that you'll be sharing with everyone you know while increasing your personal and company's brand awareness. But what is your brand? According to Forbes, it's a combination of your logo, your product, your design and feel, and your personality. Did you know that aside from being a guest, we offer even more opportunity to boost your brand? Adding your company logo and website on screen during your interview will allow viewers to recognize your brand instantly. Incorporating images and video clips is another great way to showcase your product during your live segment. Let viewers see how good you really are. And most importantly, there's you and your interview. For less than the cost of a newspaper, direct mail, or a magazine ad, you can leave our studio and within 48 hours have a permanent digital copy of your live segment to link to your social media, embed into your company website, or use in email marketing. Investing in your brand is so very important, and we can't wait to have you as a guest.
Shelter dogs aren't broken. They've simply experienced more life. If they were human, we would call them wise. They would be the ones with tails.
Welcome back. I have my guest Anne talking, and we're talking about all things mental health. So before we jump into like the solutions for mental health, Anne, tell me a little bit about how you even came to be working in the mental health world. Why is this important to you?
Well, I actually I majored in social work in college after being that person that everybody came to for advice. And so I decided, maybe there's something.
You can get paid for this,
yeah,
right?
You can get paid for giving advice, and you can learn how to give appropriate advice, right? So anyway, I was a social work major, and right out of college worked with the Department of Children and Youth in Pennsylvania, working with child abuse, physical and sexual child abuse, and worked there for a while, and then ended up in the partial hospital program working with children ages 5 to 12, and also worked in their adolescent program. It's so important to me. Kids nowadays, they've got a lot going on and they need to be heard. I grew up in that age of children are seen but not heard, and I think they do need to be heard, and that it's really important for us to spend time with them. Like I said before, reading, games, walks, as opposed to always just taking them to their practices. Of course, car rides with kids are one of the best ways to get to know your kid. But as my career has progressed, I'm currently my passion is young adults. I work with a lot of young men and women in college, a lot of young people who are struggling with anxiety and depression because of this fast-paced world that we live in, and the pressure they have to just succeed and be the best.
Yeah. So if we've established in our family that we need a little bit more help, just to have our kids be able to talk to another trusted adult, because let's be honest, parents are not always the first people that kids run to, and that can be okay. So how do we find someone who we can trust in a mental health field? Are we looking for a social worker like you are? Are we looking for a psychologist? Are we looking for a therapist? Like, where do we start? What kind of questions do we ask? What would you tell parents who are looking to introduce a mental health professional to their family, or maybe just looking to find a better one?
The one thing you need to do is ask questions and advocate for your child. If you believe your child has a mental health problem, one of the first things I believe is, you don't have to be quiet about it. It's not a stigma. All of us have kids going through things. Ask your friends. What would they do? Where have they been? Ask the school, the guidance counselor, the teachers. They have wonderful resources. Also, like I said, the pediatrician. But call around to different places. You can get a social worker, a licensed clinical social worker. You can get a licensed professional counselors. We're all therapists. We just went in it in different ways, whether it was through social work or through psychology. You would need a psychiatrist if you were interested in medication, a psychologist often to maybe do testing to see if there's disabilities with the child, but definitely call around, ask around, be open, be verbal, and advocate. And if you don't like somebody, if you go to a therapist and that just didn't feel right, that's okay. I tell my clients all the time, if there's not a connection, you don't have to come back. Go find somebody else, but ask who in the community is helping with kids.
I think that's really important because I have this loyal streak, and so I would go to a doctor or do some research ahead of time and show up and think that was kind of who I was married to, and I didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and
right.
So I think it's freeing to know we can go do a little information and digging, but also go into a couple sessions and then decide this isn't a good fit. And it's worth finding, as a family who has found a mental health professional who we trust with our lives and we love, it is worth finding that person, and they're out there.
They are out there. And yes, if you need to go to a couple sessions and then make a decision not to go back, that's okay. It happens all the time. I always say, sometimes I have to break up with people, we call it, because maybe that they have a problem that is not in my expertise, and I would be doing them a disservice by maybe staying with them. So there'll be times someone will come to me, and as I get to know them, I think, wow, their problem really is outside of my realm of expertise. For example, addiction, that is not in my expertise. So I would say to somebody, I'm going to find somebody better for you that could serve your needs better. Same thing is, sometimes people break up with me. Sometimes they may not like me. Some people may love me because I remind them of their mom, and some people may not like me because I remind them of their mom. So, it is all about finding a good fit. And, you don't have to, like you said, you feel loyal, and it's like breaking up with your hairdresser. You don't want to do it, but listen, this is your mental health. This is your child's mental health. And you always want to look, we have the wonderful internet where we can search for people and we can look at their bios online. With some kids, we want to look for, you might be interested in a play therapist that works with younger children. You might be interested in an art therapist. And usually online, people will have biographies about what they do and what their expertise is. So, you can go to a social worker, licensed professional counselor, either one would be fine.
Yeah, and I sometimes we need our own mental health professionals as parents. We'll probably do a whole show about this at some point, but we can only force our kids to do certain things. We can only, they'll only cooperate to what they're willing to do, and at the end of the day, we can only control ourselves. So sometimes the best thing we can do for our own kids' mental health is be in charge of our own personal mental health. And so maybe, we look for our own mental health professional in coordination or conjunction with our child, find something completely different. But I think that's an important piece of the puzzle as well.
It's very important, Melissa. I'm glad you brought that up, because oftentimes I used to see children, and then sometimes, you see their parent with them, and sometimes that can create a triangulation situation. And I will say to parents, I think it would be great if you would seek out your own therapist so you can, deal with some of the anger or frustration that you're having as your child goes through their own mental health issues. And oftentimes they might see another therapist in my office. And yeah, I think it's important for the parents to think about themselves as well, because the parents' self-care, if you're feeling stressed, the child is going to feel stressed. The old saying is, we're only as happy as our unhappiest child. And if your child is going through a real mental health crisis, that is going to take a toll on you, and you need to take care of yourself as well.
Yeah. So speaking of those mental health crises, and we've had this in our own family, that's a tricky road to navigate, because you have something that may have blindsided you, you're in new territory, and you're searching out resources kind of in a crisis situation. And we never do our best thinking, we never do our best parenting when we're stressed, anxious, and triggered. So what would you tell parents who have kids who are struggling with more serious mental health issues and maybe require hospitalization or find themselves being evaluated in the emergency department? Kind of what do we need to know about that?
That's a tough one because, we're dealing now with suicide as a mental health crisis, even for our young people right now. I know in New Jersey, where I practice, suicide is the third leading cause of death for children like ages 10 to 24. And it is doubling. I saw some statistics recently that it's almost doubling in that young range, the 10 to 14-year-olds. So it's very scary, and parents don't know, what do I do? What do I do? And when I worked in the partial hospital program with kids, the first thing we do, if we have a child who is making a threat to hurt themselves or to hurt other people, we need to take that seriously. And the first thing you want to do is have your child screened at a local emergency room. In New Jersey, I know we have the mobile response, the crisis, where they'll come out to your home even. But most of us will find ourselves in the emergency room with our child, which can be a very, very scary thing for both parents and children. The child is screened there, and it's determined right there whether or not, they need, what level of care do they need? Do they need to go inpatient to a hospital for maybe a week or so? Or maybe they need to just be seen in a day program, which is what I'm talking about, a partial hospitalization program where I worked, where instead of going to school, they go to a mental health program all day, and they receive several hours of schooling there, but most of the what they're working on is mental health issues. But parents need to advocate for their children, strongly advocate. When you get into this mental health system and you're in the emergency room and it's so scary, and you're trying to find a bed for your child, which again is another crisis we have, not enough beds for young people. Parents need to just advocate. I can't say enough that you need to talk and be loud and be heard on behalf of your own child. And not only with the emergency room and the possible, hospital where you're going to go, but with your insurance companies as well. It's sometimes hard to navigate the insurance system, and parents really need to be able to speak up for their children to get them the help that they need.
Yeah, and I would say, never take the first no that you get, never, take everything with a grain of salt. We have an intuition as parents, as moms. Go with your gut. If something doesn't feel right, or if you think that just doesn't seem right, dig deeper, ask questions. The emergency department handles a lot of different cases, not just mental health. And so sometimes the people there are giving you second or third hand information. Try to get right to the source. I mean, like you talked about with insurance, I know for our insurance company, they had advocates and people that could help you best navigate the system. They did this day in and day out. And I don't know about you, but like, I'm no insurance expert, and there's a lot of ins and outs there that, you know, no one really tells us about. So it is important to find those people who can help you, you know, do the ins and outs. Find a child advocate in your county. If you're already struggling with some mental health things, is there any groundwork that we can do heading into or prepping, you know, God forbid that happens and we find ourselves in an emergency department? You know, are there things to think about, questions to ask ahead of time, you know, maybe questions to even ask our insurance ahead of time? Is there any prep work we can do kind of so that when we go in, we're not so blindsided?
I think that a good thing to do is to always call your insurance company. Ask them what are my mental health benefits. I have a child that's struggling, a teen that's struggling, and I may require hospitalization, or I may require therapy. So get to know what your mental health benefits are. How much will you pay out of pocket for therapy sessions? How much will you have to pay for a partial hospital program or an intensive outpatient program? And what kind of hospital, how much will you have to pay for an inpatient stay? What psychiatrists are in network? What therapists might be in network for you? And get to know what your mental health benefits are on in your own insurance. On the back of some insurance cards, often there will be a customer service line, and oftentimes there'll be a mental health benefits service line that's separate, so you get to know your own benefits. The other thing that you need to know often is when you find yourself in an emergency situation, say you've been called by your school, and said, you know, your child just made a threat to hurt himself, and this is so scary, and you go running to pick the child up from school, and the school will say, hey, this child can't come back to school until they're screened by the local emergency room and we know they're safe. So you go running to the local emergency room, and then you find out you're stuck there for a long time. So take your phone charger, right? Let your husband know where you are. Let your friends or your parents know where you are, so you have a support system, because you may be there for a while. And there have been times, if a child is really in crisis, that parents are in the emergency room for several hours to several days waiting for hospital beds to open up. So it's always, you know, good to let people know where you are, and to have that phone charger, have a pillow, maybe even have a comfort toy for that child. I know that's not what you're thinking when you run out of the house, but maybe that's what you call up your friend or your mom or your partner and say, hey, we're going to be here for a while. Can you meet us with, you know, Johnny's favorite blanket? Can you bring his stuffed animal? Can you bring me my phone charger? Can you bring me a pillow?
Yeah, and sometimes it just takes those extra 5 minutes to gather a couple of those things so you can feel a little bit more prepared. And that's great advice about the insurance company, doing that ahead of time, because you won't have time and you won't have the presence of mind to do it once you're in crisis. So such wise, practical advice. And thank you so much for bringing that wisdom to us. Where can people connect with your practice if they're local here in New Jersey? How can they get in touch with you?
So I work for the Center for Emotional Wellness and Healing, and you can find us online. If you want to connect directly with me, you have questions, my email is ann.gaglianese@gmail.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Again, if you have a topic that you would like us to tackle here at Back Talk, you can reach out through RVN's social media at RVN TV. Thank you so much for being here. Remember, you are a great parent and you're doing good work.